What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Killer Brews, the show where beer and fear collide. If you caught one of the first few episodes I did, you'd know that what I'm attempting to do here is combine two of my passions, one being good beer and the other being serial killers or true crime. Like many of you, I've always had an interest in true crime. I worked in law enforcement. I then came out to Ohio to go to law school, and I currently work as a criminal justice professor. I teach a number of courses, including procedural law, policing. I teach classes on the courts. I do a class called Inside Out at the local prison. But no matter how many classes I offer, no matter how good I think they are, the one class that always draws the most students and the most diverse student body is serial killers. So most of my classes tend to be filled with criminal justice majors. Serial killers is the one that's truly unique in that it draws from every academic discipline. So I've had pharmacy students, business, engineering, everything you can imagine. What this means to me is that there's obviously some broad-reaching interest in serial killers, and I completely understand it and do my best to try to teach a class that's kind of interesting and informative at the same time. So, over the years, I've been engaged in some projects that involve serial killers, and specifically the serial killer memorabilia industry. Some people call it murderabilia. I know it's not a term that's liked in the industry. They prefer to use the term true crime collectibles. When I was doing these projects, writing papers, I actually wrote to a number of serial killers and have corresponded with them over the years. Again, what I'm primarily interested in is their take on the serial killer memorabilia industry, paintings, artwork, things like that. But like I said, I do teach a class on this, and one of the things that I like to do is try to categorize serial killers and figure out where they fall within a framework of analyzing the, imagine hundreds, if not thousands of serial killers that are out there at any given time. So the first few episodes, I kind of did some of the foundational work. Last episode, we talked a little bit about some of the reasons why people may engage in serial murder. And specifically, we talked about biological, sociological, and psychological reasons. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist. I'm not a biologist, not even a sociologist. I'm a criminal justice professor with a legal background, right? But I'll try my best to get through those things. And now what we're going to do is move into the area where we'll talk about the different categories into which serial killers might fall. Now, this is a social science, obviously, and there's many different frameworks that may exist as to how we categorize killers. The framework that I use in my class and I find to be the most useful is the one put together by the Holmeses. So there's Professor Ronald M. Holmes and Stephen T. Holmes. I think one is in Louisville and the other is in South Florida. I like the framework they put together, so it's what I use in my class. And if you want to check out a book on this subject matter, it's called Serial Murder, and it's out there by, who's this, Sage? Yeah, by Sage Publishing. So if you want to get a relatively inexpensive book, it's kind of interesting, that may help you gain an academic perspective on how serial killers operate, check it out. I think you can get it pretty cheap on the internet. All right, also, like I said, there's a beer part of the show. So what I have today is Guinness Nitro cold brew coffee. Now, I've been a fan of Guinness for years. My father's from England. My family is ethnically Irish. Most of my uncles and cousins drink Guinness fairly regularly. And the first time I ever had it was when I was in college. I went to England, visited my uncles. We all went out, had some beers. And I was used to drinking Yingling or other American beers, but lo and behold, I was introduced to Guinness. It was a bit darker and a bit thicker than anything I'd encountered previously, and was a bit difficult for me to drink. Now, over the years, I've become accustomed to it, and now it's not much of a problem. I enjoy Guinness. It's probably one of my favorite beers. What I did find interesting at the Guinness Brewery is starting to do some other types of beers other than the traditional, Guinness Stout, the Guinness Draft, or the export stout that we see. They've opened up a brewery in Baltimore. So we have the brewery in the St. James Gate Brewery in Dublin, but we also have one in Baltimore. So today I saw this on the shelf, this Guinness Nitro cold brew coffee, and I was interested to see if this was made in America or Ireland. And according to the packaging, this is actually made in Ireland and then shipped over. So this says, St. James Gate, Dublin, Ireland. And this is beer with coffee and natural coffee flavors. This one comes in at 4% ABV. I saw one of my other fellow YouTubers, a guy named Hillbilly Select Reviews, review this beer, and I thought I got to check it out. As a Guinness fan, got to check out the new one. So if you want to see a different perspective on this beer, check out Hillbilly Select Reviews. He does really cool reviews on coffee, beer, alcohol, just about anything you can imagine. I'm more limited in my palate. I stick to beer. It's what I know, and it's what I kind of like. So I'll be drinking this while I do this mini lecture, I guess, if you will, on visionary serial killers. So let's give this a shot. Whoa, it's a Nitro brew. So hopefully this pours nicely. I don't have a big enough cup, unfortunately, so we're going with this short plastic glass cup. So as this is a Nitro brew, you can kind of see it cascading, right? This is one of my favorite things when you pour a Guinness. You get to watch it settle. So you pour the pint, takes a couple minutes to let it do its thing. So why this settles, we'll talk a little bit. But you can see it's got a nice tan, creamy head cascading down to the, we'd say black, but I think they say, in the Guinness communities, they say it's a dark ruby red. Looks black to me. Well, before we start this section on visionary serial killers, I want to talk a little bit about this concept of serial killers by intent. And this may help us when, maybe when you're looking at a serial killer or someone you think might be a serial killer, when you're doing your classification or analysis. So serial killers by intent are those who committed acts that could have or would have intended to amount to serial murder, but failed to meet the 3 deaths threshold due to incompetency, medical attention, or mistake. So in the earlier videos, we talked about there are multiple different definitions out there as to what constitutes a serial killer. The FBI has a body count of 2. The definition I like is the one that's used by the Holmes is they say 3 bodies over 30 days. So we have a temporal element, and we have cooling down periods in between the murders. So basically, you kill somebody, you kind of return to normal, if you will, go back to life, strike and kill someone again, kind of wash, lather, repeat here, essentially, right? So we have the body count threshold of 3, we have the temporal element of at least 30 days, and then we have the significant cooling down periods in between. And it's what separates serial killers from spree killers. Again, if you want to learn more about the difference between spree killers, mass murderers, and serial killers, check out my earlier videos. I talk about that a little bit. So with that in mind, this serial killer by intent concept comes into play when we have someone who, I guess for better term, should be a serial killer, but for some reason or another doesn't actually meet the body threshold because they failed to kill one of the victims. And again, this could happen due to a number of different reasons. Could be incompetency. I tried to kill the victim, I choked them, I left them there, but they didn't actually die. Could be due to medical attention. Maybe you stabbed somebody a bunch of times, you left the body, but by an act of God, medical attention got there and they saved the person's life, or simply by mistake. You thought you killed them, left them, and whatever, they didn't die. So there are ways in which someone could have been a serial killer but didn't quite meet the body threshold, and for that reason we may say that the person is a serial killer by intent. Sure, they don't meet the strict terms of the definition, but it's not for a lack of trying. It's because of something that kind of interceded in one of the victims' life. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's a concept the Holmeses talk about in the book, and I think it's kind of an interesting concept. All right, so today we're going to cover visionary serial killers. Visionary serial killers are some of the most interesting serial killers out there, and also some of the rarest. Now, what's kind of unique about visionary serial killers is that these individuals suffer from a severe break with social reality. We might say, for a lack of a better term, that they're psychotic. This could manifest in many different ways. So they may believe that he or she's another person. Maybe you think you're Napoleon or Jack the Ripper. They may be compelled to kill because of angels or demons. God is telling me to do this. The devil is compelling me to do this. They may have visions or hear voices. And what's kind of interesting is that the time, frequency, and duration of these psychotic episodes vary. So you could have individuals that are in a constant state, of kind of paranoia and psychosis, where they constantly believe that they're inside of whatever the psychotic state might be. Or it could be temporary in that the individual appears to be normal, but then has these temporary lapses or breaks with reality, during which time they might act out violently. And the other kind of interesting thing is what's real or imagined may vary from one occasion to the next. So once I'm done doing the different categories, we'll actually analyze some real serial killers and see where they fit on this, within this framework. So if you're thinking about someone who may fall into the category of visionary serial killer, Herb Mullin would probably be someone who immediately comes to mind. Herb Mullin had some very serious mental health issues. He believed that California was going to break into the Pacific Ocean, and that the only way to prevent this was by engaging in essentially a series of human sacrifices. So Herb Mullin suffered from mental health issues for a considerable portion of his life, and he did actually go out and kill people believing that he was sacrificing them. Now, over the years, I actually wrote to Herb Mullin to try to get a little bit of insight from him. One of the things I was interested in, I have seen artwork floating around on different sites that's attributed to Mr. Mullin, and I wanted to basically know, why is it that you're giving these artworks to other people, right? I understand if you're the person who sells the artwork, I get it, right? You're in it for good old-fashioned cash. You sell artwork, whether it's by Gauguin, Van Gogh, or Charles Manson. If you sell it and collect money, I get what's in it for the dealer. What I really didn't understand is why these famous criminals would give their work to someone else and basically let them profit off of them. And one of the reasons that the criminals can't profit themselves is through something called Son of Sam laws. Now, in many places, they've been struck down by the courts, but they have some framework in place that basically prevents criminals from financially benefiting from their misdeeds. So I wanted to know, why would you let someone else get your artwork and make money off you, essentially? So I wrote to Mr. Mullen in 2013, and in 2015, I got a letter back basically saying, here's a letter, basically saying that I received your letter from you approximately a year and a half ago. One of your students' teachers had written to me requesting we begin a correspondence. So that was me. I don't have the letter, but I saved the letter's return address. If you still want to correspond, I'm ready and willing to do so. Probably has to do with psychology and criminal justice. Yours truly, Herb. You can kind of see the mentality of someone like Herb Mullin. I just wrote him kind of an innocuous letter, nothing too crazy. And a year and a half later, he decides that he's ready to interact with me. I don't necessarily know it's because of some mental health issues. Maybe he just doesn't want to talk to me because he doesn't know me. But for most of the people that I dealt with, you kind of got one or two responses. They responded rather quickly and were happy to engage, or they just ignored you altogether. Where with Mr. Mullen, it looks like he sat around with the address label ripped off my envelope for a considerable amount of time before he felt comfortable to reach out and speak with me. And again, I don't doubt that Mr. Mullen has some severe mental health issues, and that this probably impacted many of the things that he did. In his particular instance, where his psychosis, I guess, came into this, was his belief that there was indeed some impending natural disaster, and that he was the one charged with resolving this and saving humanity. And again, when we deal with issues like this, sometimes it's difficult. It's hard to know if somebody's kind of playing up at the mental health thing, so maybe they can get an insanity plea, or if they do truly have mental health issues. So Herb Mullen's one person that comes to mind. Another one, when we talk about psychosis, would be somebody named Richard Trenton Chase. He's sometimes called the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Trenton Chase, again, is also a really unique and interesting individual. Now, if we use our traditional definition of serial killer, he probably falls a bit short. It looks like his first murder is December 29th, 77. The last one, January 27th, 78. So he misses that 30-day threshold by a day or two, essentially. Am I going to get hung up on the day or two threshold? Not really. If they caught him a few days later, would it count? Sure. So I guess basically I'm going to say, even though he doesn't hit the temporal element, he's got the body count. His motivation is what I'd expect. And I'm going to say he is, for better or worse, essentially serial killer by intent, right? So either you don't meet the body count. In this instance, I'm going to say we don't meet the temporal element. Again, not for a lack of effort. There's nothing to suggest he would have stopped murdering, except for the fact that he was caught by the police. Now, what's kind of unique about visionary serial killers is because of their break with reality, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, they tend to be sloppy at times. What this means in our modern age is they tend to get caught. They tend to leave physical evidence behind, and due to advances in technology and policing, they get caught. What does that mean? A lot of times you have someone who might have been a visionary serial killer, but they fail to meet the temporal element or the body threshold because they get caught. And for that reason, they're one of the rarest types of serial killer. All right, we've talked a little bit about that. Let's talk about this beer. As you can see, it's settled nicely. Nice dark color, nice creamy tan head. Let's give it a sniff. This one actually really smells like coffee. Now, if you're a fan of the regular Guinness, you know it generally smells like dark roasted malt and pretty much tastes like that as well. This is a bit different. On the nose, it's kind of a bigger coffee smell than what you'd usually detect in Guinness. Smells solid. Let's give it a shot. First thing I think I pick up, this does taste a little bit lighter than regular Guinness to me. Not to say that it's a light beer by any stretch of the imagination, but if you have this spectrum with light on one end and heavy on the other, it's probably in the middle. It's in the in the middle, probably leaning towards light a little bit as opposed to the super heavy bit. That being said, it's got a nice texture to it, nice and creamy, nice and smooth. What do you pick up? I think initially you kind of get that coffee punch in the mouth. Then you get some nice dark roasted grain, and then you get a little bit of a sweetness, kind of like a caramel taste as well. Now this is the first time that I've had this, so I was kind of excited to see how it differs. And to me, I think the big difference is texture is slightly different, and the taste is a lot heavier on the coffee than maybe like the roasted grain and maybe a bit of a dark chocolate kind of thing you might get with a regular Guinness. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid beverage, and I would definitely give it a thumbs up. I would definitely drink another one. So I'll enjoy this while we finish the rest of the video. When we start to analyze serial killers, there's a couple of categories that we're going to go through to try to explain what it is that they do and why they're unique and what separates them from the other categories. So first and foremost, we're going to look at the motivation. And with serial killers, the motivation can be intrinsic or extrinsic. So if it's intrinsic, the incitement to violence occurs because of something deep inside the personality and psyche of the killer, and this basically compels them to kill. If the motivation were to be extrinsic, there's something in the environment that compels them to kill. With visionary serial killers, motivation's always going to be intrinsic. There's something within them, whatever their particular delusion may be, their psychological issues or mental health issues is what compels them to kill, so they're going to be intrinsic. Anticipated gains is another category that we'd like to look into. With most serial killers, they get something out of the kill. Now, it could be sexual gratification. It could be money in the case of comfort killers. With visionary serial killers, they murder because there's something in it for them. But what is that? It's some kind of psychological payoff. The payoff can be real or imagined, material or physical. With visionary serial killers, they're seeking some sort of psychological release or psychological pleasure, right? So basically, you want to feel better about something that's happened. So in the case of Herb Mullen, if he is indeed compelled to kill because he believes California is going to break off into the Pacific Ocean, once he kills someone, he may have some temporary relief where he feels that he's appeased God or whatever the power is that's compelling him to do this. So they may be seeking some release of pain or a sense of mental equilibrium. And again, really just depends on the individual killer and what their break with reality is like, what their compulsion is, and kind of how they're attempting to appease it. But generally speaking, the anticipated gain is going to be something psychological. They're generally not in it for sexual purposes. They're not in it for money or anything like that. All right. Homicidal behavior patterns. One of the things that help us delineate one type of serial killer from another is their victim selectivity. So most serial killers have what we'd call an ideal victim type. And again, ideal victim type could be based on a number of different things. So for sexually motivated serial killers, there may be something in the physical appearance of the victim that they find appealing. Maybe it's the build, race, hair color, the way their hair is cut, age, whatever it might be. There's something that they find appealing and that kind of draws them to these victims. Now, if we're talking about comfort killers or those that kill for financial gain, what's the ideal victim type? Generally somebody that has financial means, whatever it is they seek. Could be money, insurance policies, business, whatever it might be. What's kind of unique about these types of serial killers, visionary serial killers, is for the most part, they don't have an ideal victim type. So the victims don't really share common physical, occupational, or visual traits that are apparent. The only commonality is basically going to be their proximity to the serial killer. So, what do they have in common? The unfortunate, decision that they happen to cross paths with this serial killer on this day. So IVTs, again, when we look at other serial killers, a lot of times you may see they target prostitutes or hitchhikers or whatever it is, whatever the category is. With these folks, we generally don't see an IVT or an ideal victim type. So another thing we're going to look at is method of murder. So we can generally try to say, are killers act focused or process focused? If they're act focused, they tend to act quickly, and their goal or intent is to dispatch the victim. For killers that are process focused, they tend to draw out the kill. So they may engage in torture, they may rape the victim, they may do all kinds of horrible things, try to degrade them, try to hurt them. And generally what you'll see is that serial killers will get something out of the reaction in their victims. So they enjoy seeing the fear and apprehension in their eyes, and this is kind of what they may get out of it. Now, when we're dealing with visionary serial killers, for the most part, they tend to be act-focused, meaning that the murders tend to happen relatively quickly. The murder itself is the task at hand, and thus there's no need to engage in torture and all this other types of stuff. The murder may also be somewhat spontaneous, which is kind of rare. In many instances, serial killers stalk their victims, or at least put a lot of time into preparing before they strike. In this instance, you're going to find that the victims may be more randomly selected than they are with other types of serial killers. Generally, there's going to be no real planning involved. And if we go back to one of the early classification systems put forward by the FBI, it was organized versus disorganized types of serial killers. Visionaries would largely fall into the disorganized type of serial killer. So when you analyze a crime scene, you're going to see that there's no preparation, no real planning. And how does this show? They may not even have brought a weapon with them to the crime scene. They may simply rely on something that they find at the crime scene. So if I come into your house and you have a block of knives sitting on by the kitchen sink or something, I might take one of those and use that as a weapon. Where other serial killers are going to put a lot more time, effort, and planning into it and leave kind of nothing to chance. These folks don't. And the reason is they kind of strike when the compulsion hits, whenever this mental lapse occurs. When does it happen? Who knows? Could be sporadic, could be constant, but the idea is they act when compelled to do so. So they'll use whatever's at the scene in many instances. The other thing they'll do, which is kind of, I don't want to say uncommon, but if you want to be a serial killer and get away with this for an extended period, they usually try not to leave too much evidence behind. Like I mentioned earlier, visionary serial killers, because of the way they operate, they may be in a frenzy. They often leave the weapon at the murder scene or other physical evidence behind, which leads to them getting caught. Now, one other thing we tend to analyze with serial killers is the murder locations. You can be geographically transient or geographically stable. Those that are stable tend to kill in places where they're comfortable. Now, this could mean close to your home, close to your place of employment, or some other place where you generally feel safe and comfortable. This might be, say, I'm an avid hiker or an outdoorsman, maybe a state park or a national park. It's obviously not my home or my place of employment, but it's somewhere I know well, somewhere I feel comfortable, somewhere I feel that I can operate with relative impunity for the most part, because I know this area well. Visionary serial killers tend to be stable. Now, the alternative would be those that travel. These are geographically transient, and these would be killers that travel for the sake of murdering in different places. So maybe you kill somebody in state A, then travel a couple hundred miles, kill someone in state B. You'd be geographically transient. These folks, for the most part, are stable. They usually start killing close to home and usually stay killing in whatever their comfort zone is. Now, again, what could this be? It could be residence, some recreational area, place of employment. But what you might find is that as time goes on, distance plays less of a role, and visionary serial killers may start to expand their comfort zone. Something called the distance decay function. So as they become more comfortable and more involved, maybe they stretch out a little bit more. But in general, what you're going to find is murders are going to be concentrated in a particular area, generally close to the killer's home. Now, just as a recap, when we look at the victims, for the most part, we're dealing with a non-specific type, so we don't have an ideal victim type. There's random selection in that there's not going to be a whole lot of stalking or anything like that involved. And for the most part, the victims are going to be strangers. So again, this is speaking in broad generalizations. For the most part, they're not going to be known to the killer or familial victims. They're going to be strangers. Methods tend to be act-focused. Again, we want to dispatch the victim as quickly as possible. So if I believe California is breaking off into the ocean, what's the best thing to do? Kill someone quickly to appease the gods or spirits that might make California break off into the ocean. Or if you're somebody like, Rick Chase, you think that Richard Chase is an interesting character. I'll probably do a video of him on later. He talks a little bit about some of the issues he has. And again, there are many. At different times, he believes that the Nazis are after him or organized crime. He believes that his internal organs are inverted. He has problems with erectile dysfunction and believes one of the ways to resolve it is to ingest blood. So as a young man, he starts killing animals and drinking the blood, and he kind of graduates into bigger prey where he kills humans and ingests their blood. So when we're talking about, someone like him, does he really want to draw out and torture his victims? Not so much. What is he interested in? Ingesting blood and resolving whatever he believes his issues may be. Now, he's a little interesting because he does mutilate the bodies after death, and we could talk about overkill and that kind of stuff in another video. But for the most part, they dispatch the victims quickly to achieve whatever it is they need to satiate their mental lapse. Again, act-focused, spontaneous, for the large part, disorganized. Talk about Rick Chase. He walked around in a bright orange jacket covered in blood, looking like literally a serial killer. A lot of times you see serial killers and you think, he looks like the guy next door. Not Rick Chase. He looks like a straight serial killer. So he's not taking any steps to cover his identity, to hide what he's doing. Because of his mental health issues, he's kind of right out there, and it should be easily detectable by those that might be paying attention. Murder locations, again, are primarily concentrated. If you're interested in learning more about visionary serial killers, again, check out Richard Trenton Chase, check out Joseph Kalinger or Herbert Mullin. They all provide a pretty decent example of visionary serial killers. All right, I'm going to call it a wrap for this video. I'm going to come back soon and we'll do the next category. So the next one I'm going to do is mission serial killers. These are individuals that are driven to kill because they feel the need to eradicate some class of undesirables from the world. So keep your eyes out for the next video. Hopefully I'll have it out in the next week or so. Hey, until then, take care, stay safe, and cheers.